The MACRA Terror is not only my favourite missing Doctor Who story, but one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time. A colony in the distant future being controlled by sinister crabs. It's terrifying and thrilling, with just the right level of camp. Sadly, all 4 episodes are missing from the BBC's archive. But it was animated in 2019 in the first ever missing episode animation to be in colour. Join me in my journey of revisiting Doctor Who's missing episode range as we look back and reflect on the MACRA Terror and ask the question, would fans accept this radical reimagining of the original story? The Doctor, Polly, Ben and Jamie land on a colony in a distant future. The people are happy and happy to work, happy to obey control, yet beneath the joyful colony holds a terrifying secret. Whispers of beings called the MACRA, but control must be believed and obeyed. No one in the colony believes in MACRA. The MACRA do not exist. There are no MACRA! After animating The Power of the Daleks and the Tom Baker unfinished serial Shada, the team at BBC Studios, led by Charles Norton, tackled the MACRA Terror. They worked alongside Sun and Moon, who did the character animation. The character animation was a huge improvement over previous releases, gaining almost 360-degree motion using Toon Boom Harmony's master controllers. The MACRA Terror animation is such a bold departure from what had come in the past. The Power of the Daleks expanded the sets, but matched the original designs closely. It was 16:9 widescreen, sure, but it was still in black and white. Whereas the MACRA Terror makes bold new design choices, completely redesigning sets from the ground up. Instead of black and white, we have glorious colour. The MACRA Terror looks better than it ever did in its original production. It feels expensive and at times filmic. It demonstrates its transition to colour in the opening moments, recapping the ending of the Moonbase, and it feels like a mission statement for future animations. We're leaving the past behind to pastures new, whether you like it or not. I think if you were watching the stories in order and finished the Moonbase animation and went straight to this, it would be a really nice transition, so I really like that choice. The first thing that stands out is the incredible character animation. The pseudo 3D effect on the character models is done so effortlessly. Characters can move their heads in every direction and emote smaller emotions that other animations couldn't even dream of. The way Polly looks at Ephicia with a cheeky, innocent look is just perfect, and I just couldn't picture other animation teams pulling off this little moment. It feels the closest to recapturing the original performances, and it's just so exciting to watch. The character designs are great too. Pat looks amazing in this story, and Jamie looks kinda hot. The animation does have its limitations though. The opening parade is a little bit awkward since they just can't animate a huge crowd of extras. It ends up being a line of dancers awkwardly moving. Also controversially, they cut out an entire scene. The scene that was cut depicts the Doctor and his friends getting makeovers in the refreshing department. The scene was dropped since it would have required to have to make more character models for the Doctor and his companions, which is understandable. But it is really sad because it is a really fun scene. But I can forgive it. Yet these limitations are easily forgotten when it just looks so good. The lighting in the story is just really well done. The glow of the controller's screen, the lantern in the pilot's office, the soft warm glow of lens flares just ties the character animation with the 3D sets so well. The rim lighting, yes, it's called rim lighting, stop laughing, around the characters is really beautiful to look at. Ben looking out the window at the rain, the Doctor working out formulas on the transparent glass. There are just so many great visuals. Although there are many new redesigns in this story, I still believe that they tried to reference the original design still, using the symbols on the original set walls as sort of an emblem or insignia or logo even of the colony is a nice touch. Showing the outer courtyards at nighttime with the searchlights just opens up and expands the world so massively, yet doesn't ruin the claustrophobia of the story. It somehow balances the pair well. The courtyard now displays old boarded up houses and hints that this is where colonists used to live before moving into the facility. It expands the world building even more. The biggest redesign is the look of the MACRA. Instead of being a crab suit attached to a small car, it's now a massive crab, still maintaining its long kooky eyes. I feel like the original design would be near impossible to replicate for animation, so the redesign just makes sense. I think the original has always been seen as a little cheap. The new look adds so much more menace to their characters instead of being a little bit comical. But I would argue that the new MACRA crabs are possibly too big. Their size at times is ridiculously large. In the cliffhanger where the MACRA enters the courtyard, it's so big that it almost takes up the entire courtyard. Where could it possibly be going? But when one picks up Polly and dangles her in the air, it's an incredible visual. Their glowing eyes in the dark shadows is spooky and menacing. The music in this story is so chaotic and crazy, and I adore it. From the corny elevator type music that is heard throughout the colony, to the extreme synthetic sounds when the controller screams there are no MACRA, it feels hypnotic and deranged. I think that this story has one of the most inventive and experimental scores of the show's history. In the cliffhanger recap of episode 3, the new visuals show the camera falling over, which doesn't happen in the original. It's a brilliant visual and adds an extra level of menace to the scene, but there is no sound effect to accompany the fall, so it just feels a bit wrong. Then it just surfaces the old question of, if we alter the soundtrack, we alter the sets, we change the actors, then at what point is this a completely new story? I wouldn't mind a little thump sound effect, but can respect not altering it too. It's difficult because when you take a studio-bound audio and put it into an animated, almost filmic setting where the camera can go anywhere, the two don't always match up. The MACRA Terror is heavily inspired by George Orwell's book 1984, which is a dystopian tale about a society overrun by mass surveillance under a dictatorship. There's a great film adaptation with John Hurt in it, so check that out. I think Doctor Who always shines when it takes inspiration from other literary sources and gives it a Doctor Who spin. 1984 with giant crabs is just brilliant. Adding space crabs is such a winning formula that Stephen Moffat does it again in Last Christmas, where it's just the movie Alien meets crabs. The story is all about questioning and rejecting authority or control. The Doctor is an anarchist at heart, especially in this story, playing the fool when releasing Medoc from the cell, saying, "Well, I didn't know it was a crime. I'm not from here." To destroying public property when he knows it's hypnotizing his friends, and telling Pilot that bad laws were meant to be broken. Ben being hypnotized to obey control or the MACRA is such an interesting storyline for him. It just makes sense. He's a sailor, and listening and obeying is important in that role. So out of all of the Doctor's friends, he's probably the one to fall for it. His internal battle with rejecting the brainwashing is fascinating throughout the story. You really feel sorry for him because you know he just can't help it. The story flows really well, except for Jamie in episode 3. For some reason, there is endless scenes of Jamie making his way through a passage with a MACRA following him. This is fine for a scene or two, but it goes for half of episode 3 and the beginning of episode 4, and nothing really happens. It's literally Jamie walking and a MACRA following. The poor animators did their best to make these scenes more interesting, but when Jamie isn't really in danger, he never gets hurt, the MACRA never attacks, just stalks. It's incredibly dull. It feels like they had other things to discuss with the other characters, but just ran out of things to do with Jamie. This story could have been the world's best 3-part story without this. The story balances thrills and comedy really well. The famous Highland Fling scene where Jamie escapes the colonists by performing the Highland Fling, where he flings himself out of the room. The colony feels like a real place. The world building is so well done. The structure of obeying the controller. They're all mining gas but don't question where it's going. With the doctor being like, why does everybody have to be the same? It's not just anti-authority, but anti-conformity. Ncuti Gatwa's first season attempts to do a similar message in Dot and Bubble, but tackles racism and classism rather than authority. Both set in far distant colonies, both have giant bug-like creatures. But I think this story is most similar to another story from the classic series, The Happiness Patrol, which is another favourite story of mine. It's about a society built around being happy or else. These sort of political commentary, far future dystopian planets are so much more interesting to me as a viewer than just painting the sky pink on a funky distant world. It has something to say. Science fiction is fun, but I like a political undercurrent to the type of television I watch. I think the story just works because even though it's an insane story with giant crabs, everyone takes it seriously. The cliffhanger when it's revealed who the controller really is, and Polly screams, "They're in control!" It's just chilling. The MACRA voice could be seen as comical at points because it becomes so deranged, but I can't help believe it within its context. The yelling of "there are no MACRA" is something that has stuck with me since first watching on a low-quality telesnap reconstruction on Dailymotion. It just gives me chills. I love it. The MACRA Terror as a story and an animation is just brilliant. I love when Doctor Who goes all anti-authority, it just speaks to me. The animation is just so great in every aspect, but a massive shout out to the character animation team at Sun and Moon. I remember thinking after watching this animation that if the rest of the animations looked like this, I would be the happiest person alive. I thought it can only go up from here. But unfortunately, as I've gotten older, I realised that things don't always improve over time. I wish that Sun and Moon was still involved with these animations, but unfortunately, BBC Studios have decided to move on to other animation companies to do the character animation. I am thankful in a way that my favourite missing story, The MACRA Terror, got the best animation team to work on it. But it's just so sad when so many great stories out there don't get the same amount of love. Everything comes down to budgets and demands. These animations are niche, and I get that. And I don't want to end this review on a negative note. I love this animation. I could talk about this story all day for the rest of my life. I can make this channel exclusively about the MACRA Terror, and I would be so content. This truly is an exceptional production from script to animation. It's just brilliant. If you haven't given this story a go, please give it a try. Immerse yourself into the story. Take the giant crab seriously and you will have an amazing time. So, what did you think of the MACRA Terror animation? Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nez YouTube channel.